Good evening. This is Kyle McCall, making this recording for Aspen University and Dr. Barry Thompson in regard to leading in cultural contexts. Today, what we're going to discuss is several items describing the dimensions of cultural differences and how leadership skill sets are involved in those, discussing the multicultural and global leader dilemmas, explaining components of developing high-functioning teams using tools like the KSA knowledge, skills, and awareness, and discuss how these three concepts particularly pertain to managing effectively in a globally diverse team setting. I'll start with dimensions of cultural differences and leadership skill sets. There are formal and informal leadership skills, and some are endowed by the organizational responsibility and authority provided by the position. And Chen also wrote that subgroups in the organization, union leaders, for example, really have no formal or organizational title or role. However, there are unofficial groups such as thought leaders, commissioned to study processes, procedures, policy, and other initiatives. These are formed of informal types of organizational cultures. The formal hierarchy, command and control versus egalitarian matrices, and the egalitarian matrix carries shared contributions and responsibilities. Now, Farrell wrote that a leader cannot necessarily control the culture, however, can contribute and direct the movement of the culture in the right opportunity. And there are other subcultures such as business units, business segments, and certain departments that are contained within the organization that make up other subcultures. When we think in terms of multicultural and global leader dilemmas, we can think in terms of Chen talked about diversity in leadership and how it must become a core competency at all levels of the organization, not just at the leadership level. We have to learn to train and bring all levels of the organization, including our employees, along. A cross-cultural society, there's parts of diversity that are not always viewed the same. When we look at people from the East versus people from the West, the cultures are different, so it takes a great deal of effort to bring the two together to have similar and congruent meanings. So the result makes diversity training pretty difficult. Now, Kozinska talked about relative power theory and related that money impacts culture, but it's not always a resource, or it could be a resource in a political culture and not always in a material sense in diversity. While Martinez talked about stories and story circles. And in Martinez's study, what she found was that community organizing tools, liberation-oriented frameworks, and these help to promote harmony within the interactions of the groups and the subsequent cultures. Chen, of course, talked about toughness or tenderness. So there's a balance to strike in there. So is it situationally appropriate? And can you create your own leadership style from studying these? When we think in terms of knowledge, skills, and awareness, ethnocentricity of leadership, this term can come across many parts of the cultures. For example, when we use the term indigenous, sometimes that's equated with the thoughts of less privileged, underdeveloped, maybe even less intelligent, rather than relating to a culture or a specific type of people. The difference between equal partners in business, through countries, corporations, and businesses, the culture is sometimes dependent on where the company is headquartered. For example, the organization I work for is headquartered in Paris, France. So we have another headquarters in London. So we get a lot of the London and French type of influence on our organization, even here in the United States. Chen talked about the research that demonstrates consistent and significant differences between the Western and the Eastern cultures. And the point being that Chen was bringing out is, as global leaders, we need to understand both the Eastern and the Western differences as we begin to understand how culture is arranged, how it's viewed, and how we need to endeavor to change it. And through the knowledge, skills, and awareness, or the KSA, we look at strengths. We look at exploring the various cultures contained within our organization. We look at personal identity within those cultures. One person doesn't view themselves as another person does. We look at the victim culture. Some cultures, particularly in third world countries, tend to take on a victim type of view. So we want to be aware of that. And then what are the opportunities versus the pitfalls? So how do we bring the whole team together, and what are the dangers or the effects that we need to look for? And by and large, looking at learning from lived experiences, not only our lived experiences, but looking at other leaders in the organization, what backgrounds they come from, what cultures they come from, and what experiences they have lived. So as we bring it together, the managing the effective globally diverse teams, one of the things that we want to think about is dimensions of cultural diverse leadership sets. And when we think in terms of that, whether it's rational for individuals to engage in politics, given their relative position in the hierarchy. And that was what we learned from Kozinska. And this fits in with the multicultural global context and also requirement for developing highly effective teams. Now, when we think in terms of multicultural and global leadership dilemmas, is it toughness or is it tenderness? And this relates to dimensions in culture and situational components, and also requires growth of the team skills. And finally, when we're looking at developing high-functioning teams, the hierarchical versus the egalitarian roles or egalitarian roles, and the subcultures within an organization. We must be aware of these cultures, primary and the subcultures. And the high potential teams have to understand the cultural differences, the leadership at least, and the multicultural and global leaders understand their leadership dilemmas and understand them thoroughly and completely. So with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity. I presented a list of references from which I drew the information on to present this. Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity. Have a great day.